What is up, guys? Welcome to the Need Enough Podcast. I'm Andres.
This is Sabrina.
And joining us today, we have Miss Clarke Wolfe in the house. What is up, Clarke?
Hey, y'all. I'm so happy to be here with both of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you, Clarke, obviously, to talk about Mike Flanagan, to talk about Hill House, to talk about the season, 'tis the season.
The reason spooky for the season.
Yes, that we have finally come upon. It is October. It is spooky month. Obviously, it's going to be different. Not a lot of Halloween parties. At least you shouldn't be having a lot of Halloween parties. And obviously, not a lot of Halloween horror nights, which is usually what I do on Halloween and on Halloween month. But we do have a lot of scary movies, a lot of scary thoughts on these scary movies specifically, and The Haunting of Hill House, which is something that I've been wanting to talk about with Sabrina ever since she made me watch this show. And it took me like 7 months to watch it when she told me to watch it, because I was afraid, frankly. I am not good with scary movies. I'm not very good, especially like the supernatural scary kind. If it's a killer or like a vampire or some kind of monster like that, I'm cool. But if it's like something ghostly, supernaturally, not good. Not good with that, because you never know what's around the corner. I'm just like, werewolves aren't real, but hey, them ghosts though, they could be real.
I'm not here for ghosts. Ghosts
Yep.
freak me out too, so I'm right
Yep.
there with you.
Yeah.
And this is a particular type of like ghostly haunting. It's always deep and dark and sad, so it puts you in that hole.
Oh yeah. I mean, we'll get to a specific episode in The Haunting of Hill House that kind of did me wrong. It made me feel all type of ways that did not let me sleep for a variety of reasons, which is why it's so interesting. It wasn't even the scares; it was just the traumatic feeling of it all. But before we get into Haunting of Hill House, I wanted to give us the opportunity to kind of talk about Mike Flanagan in general. The guy has done quite a few horror movies, ranging from big budget, ranging from supernatural to just creepy killer guy. And I want to give you guys the opportunity to talk about Mike Flanagan as a director. I know you guys are much bigger fans than I am. I unfortunately haven't kept up with his filmography as much as Sabrina and Clarke have. But I want to give you guys the chance to really kind of tell me the reason why Mike Flanagan is such a unique horror director and what makes him so different from other horror types. And I'll give you the floor first, Clarke.
Oh, well, thank you. I guess I would say that, the thing I love about Mike's work is that, so for me, when it comes to horror, I love genre because to me, horror storytelling is always about something deeper. Good horror storytelling is always about something deeper. There's a discussion because I think when you're talking about what scares you, that is a deeply human, personal thing. Now, those scares can obviously be a guy in a mask with an axe and he's like killing people. That's one thing. But I think that if you look at other types of horror, you can see that there's a real emotional weight to the story that's being told. If you want your audience to be extra scared, they have to care about the characters. Otherwise, who cares? There's no tension, there's no anything if they're in danger. And so I think for Mike Flanagan, for me, the first film of his that I saw was Oculus, and was very, very heavily influenced by Stephen King. I had the opportunity to interview Mike at the junket for Oculus. It was one of my first jobs I ever did for Nerdist, and we talked about The Shining, and we talked about Stephen King, and we talked about that influence on him. And then, sure enough, he directed Ouija: The Origin of Evil, which sounds kind of like silly, but actually is an incredibly well-reviewed movie. And then, of course, Gerald's Game with Netflix, I would argue, is like the thing that kind of, now of course Hush on Netflix, super popular, people love that, but I think Gerald's Game was the one that sort of like kicked him into the mainstream, if that makes sense, because also not only was it a successful Stephen King adaptation, which Lord knows not all of them are, but a lot of people always said that Gerald's Game was unfilmable, and so the fact that he not only did it but did it successfully, I think got a lot of mainstream attention. So I bring all of that up because, and Sabrina, I would love to hear, if you agree with this, that there are themes in Mike Flanagan's work that emerge consistently. There's usually addiction is usually something that is in all of his work, and the way that parents can make their kids to suffer, or how their kids, how a person, a loved one, um, manages or copes with a loved one's addiction. That is a theme that is through a lot of his work, similar to Stephen King, honestly. And then, parental stories. There's usually a lot of, I know it's a horror movies, but there's usually a lot of death, like a traumatic, inciting event is usually throughout all of his films. There's one that I love called Before I Wake, which took, if you know anything about this movie, you probably know that it took like years to get released in the United States, because it was oh God, what was the production company? There was a major production company that went under, and so they owned the rights to the film. They owned the distribution here in the U.S. It came out in Canada. It came out in Europe. It came out everywhere except for here. And it got mixed reviews, because I think a lot of people weren't ready or expecting an emotional, heartfelt story that is maybe not so scary, but uses horror, uses the supernatural to tell that kind of story. So I think that's what makes Mike usually makes him special, and we'll talk about it with Hill House and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Clarke took a lot of the words right out of my mouth. I think Mike Flanagan is this like interesting horror filmmaker because he has a particular voice and approach to the genre. He always, like Clarke said, deals with similar themes and meanings throughout his film, besides the ones that Clarke mentioned, like grief and trauma, just in general, like, yes, from loved ones and from early on in life, or just any instances, and how they kind of cope with it, whether it is addiction or whether it is their personality shift and change that we see from when they're children to adults, which obviously we'll get into with Hill House. He builds such rich mythology with his stories, and even when he adapts someone else's work, he does so in a way that still feels like very so much like his own words. And he fully realizes and fleshes out his characters. We understand motivations, why people are the way that they are, and we do get that attachment to them, and that adds that interesting kind of layer to the horror films, because we're rooting for our characters. We're not wanting them to get picked off one by one like a silly, fun horror movie. And that buildup of heavy atmospheric tension that he has, he's light on jump scares. It doesn't have the typical horror tropes that you would maybe find in some of the big, like, low budget but big blockbuster type of horror films that have been coming out. And when he does use jump scares, they're definitely earned, and it's not in a way. That's something that's I really enjoy, because every single time Hill House is littered with them, just a few throughout, but it works every single time. It's so important for every single scene that it does happen. And yeah, again, meticulous details, amazing camera work. That's something that's prevalent throughout his entire filmography. So again, that unique voice and approach to horror filmmaking is what makes him an exciting horror filmmaker to me. And I just adore every piece of work. Like you said, adapting Stephen King, Gerald's Game, that is so, and how much he added to that story when a lot of it takes place in a bed. She can't even move. You have to build so much atmospheric tension, and he does that throughout his entire filmography, but it's so prevalent with that one because we're in one space basically the entire time. So yeah, he's so exciting. I think I'm looking forward to every single thing that he does. I think he's awesome.
It's interesting, Clarke, because Sabrina, RB3 and I had a live stream, and we talked about how horror has had kind of this new renaissance period as far as what horror is considered nowadays, and how the genre has been pushed to a different level. Not to take anything away from the movies in the past that kind of influenced the directors we have nowadays, but kind of how horror is now considered to be a prestigious art form, considering there is a lot of meticulous detail inside the direction, inside the camera work, but also inside the story itself and the kind of topics and themes you can hit upon. Obviously, Sabrina and I are big Ari Aster fans. RB3 and I are big Jordan Peele guys.
Yeah.
All these kind of directors that are kind of using those different styles. James Wan is another one. If I'm being honest, I really do feel like James Wan is one of those guys who kind of really adds artistic value into his films. And it's interesting because Mike Flanagan does that as well, and I feel like that's a really interesting thing to say. And the Stephen King of it all, I'm a recent Stephen King convert. I didn't grow up with Stephen King, if I'm being honest. I kind of just got into it because I thought Pennywise was cool.
That's great.
Yeah, when I saw the movies, and obviously I've gotten back and rewatched and reread a few of this of his films. Obviously, the biggest one to me that Stephen King hits on, he hits a lot of topics, especially about the evil inside humanity itself and how evil from the past can kind of influence the evil of the present. Um,
Absolutely.
which is something that Mike Flanagan touches on as well. But I think if I really am being honest, guys, and you guys might not be with me, but I think the crown jewel, at least in my opinion, as far as originality in camera work and originality in filmmaking when it comes to a horror film, it's The Shining. It's 1980s The Shining. And to follow up The Shining with Doctor Sleeps, this is my transition into Doctor Sleeps, by the way, if you didn't catch on. Is something that's kind of daunting, if I'm being honest, considering how notorious Kubrick was in creating that film and how meticulous he was with the details, with the camera work, with the direction, with the acting that Jack Nicklaus provided. What was it about Doctor Sleep that really said, "Oh, damn, he did it. He followed up The Shining"? Clark, I don't know if you think he did that.
Okay, I have thoughts on
Oh,
this.
let's do it.
So, and Sabrina, I'm really excited to talk about this with you too, because I saw your tweet that you had just finished the film and or just watched it like a few weeks ago. And I was so curious if you had watched the theatrical cut or the director's cut, because I have feels on this. So, first thing I want to say is I literally, no exaggeration, 6 hours ago just finished a re-listen of the audiobook of The Shining. Stephen King's book, The Shining, actually is the first Stephen King book I ever read, and that was not until a couple of years ago. I never read his books growing up, and I'm honestly kind of glad for me personally that that was the case, because so much of the material, I mean, yes, we get why it's salacious. There's always a lot of sex. There's always a lot of really graphic violence. It's like, I get why young people like reading Stephen King. But kind of like we were talking about earlier, there's always so much more going on beneath the surface. And The Shining is a great example of that. And that brings me to, I do not care for Stanley Kubrick's film. I don't like it at all, actually. And the truth is that it's not because I read the book and then I saw the movie and I was like, oh, this isn't, the movie, and so or the book, and I'm mad about it. It's just, for me, the movie Kubrick, I'm not a huge Kubrick fan, so I will go ahead and say that. And so with something like The Shining, and oh my God, I could talk to you guys about this for hours, because also you just said Ari Aster, and it's it was similar for me with Hereditary at first, because I'm a horror fan. I watched Hereditary. Everybody was freaking out about it. I saw it, I want to say it's South by Southwest, maybe. I saw it at a film festival, and I saw it, and I was watching it, and I was like, I get why people are reacting to this, but as a horror fan, I was like, well, where did everyone think this was going? I mean, because similar, in my opinion, to The Shining, both Jack Nicholson and Toni Collette, when we start the movie, they're at like a 9. You know what I mean? So for me, I was like, well, where else is there to go? There's nowhere else to go. Like, of course, this is going to be like, this. And for me with The Shining, that's part of why I don't really respond to it, is because, don't get me wrong, it is an entertaining as hell performance from Jack Nicholson. He is endlessly watchable, but there's no emotion there, because the whole point of The Shining is watching a man lose a battle with his demons, literal demons and figurative demons, ghosts in a hotel, and alcoholism, right? So that's my first thing. I want to let Sabrina chime in before we get to Doctor Sleep, because I have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I agree to a certain extent. When I think about it along with the book, it does miss that aspect for sure, but I enjoy it for what it is. But that's why I actually love Doctor Sleep, because he was able to take Stephen King's original vision and really add that heart and that depth to the story. Like we said with Mike Flanagan, he's amazing at that. And still honor Kubrick's work, because it is classic. And if he didn't, then I feel like a lot of people would kind of be turned off by the film. So he was able to kind of marriage both of those things together. And that's why I enjoy it. But wow, hot take on The Shining, Clark.
Yeah.
I I
Because
started reading Stephen King. I think I was like 8 or 9 when I read it. Like,
Wow.
and
Wow.
it's been since I was little, and I actually, in my adult life, haven't really revisited the books a lot. So I did actually plan on rereading The Shining. It's like I had more time when I was a kid, so I was knocking these books out like it was so easy. But I do plan on revisiting it. But I love all the works separately for what they are. But I love that Doctor Sleep was able to bring those together.
it's so interesting that you say that, Clark, because I consider The Shining to be no cap, like no joke, the greatest horror film of all time. Like I
A lot
really
of
do
people
feel
do.
it shocked me how incredible it was. Like I was literally blown away when I saw it. I was like, okay, this is all the hype. Like it really is all the hype. So I think that's amazing. You say that already.
That's what's so interesting because when you get into those like top 25 greatest horror movies of all time, there's always somebody who's going to say The Exorcist. There's always someone who's going to say The
Yeah.
Shining. There's always someone who's going to say Texas Chainsaw. And then like, the other top 10 just like are swishy and it could be whatever it is. So I love this. And again, this is a thing that whether it was on Collider Nightmares, whether it was on the Bloodcast with Ryan Turek, whether it was whatever, my thing about genre that I love is how deeply personal it
Mm,
is. And that is why I totally understand why something like The Shining just hits some people in the gut and it like rocks them. And then other people, it's just like, no, not for me. I felt
mhm.
nothing. And that's what's so cool about it. But to Sabrina's point, like it was so it's so unfortunate that Doctor Sleep, the film, the adaptation, couldn't have just waited a minute for HBO Max or for a longer form streaming platform.
Mm,
I think because he was tasked with doing so much.
mm,
The to use an example, the end of and I mean without spoilers, the end of The Shining and the book and the end of The Shining, the movie, are literally opposite. Like
mm,
one of them, the hotel goes up in flames. The other one, it doesn't. It just gets cold. And that's so it's literally, and King always says, Kubrick's movie is cold, my book is hot. It's literally hot and cold, right? So, how do you, as Mike Flanagan, adapt this book that Stephen King, who famously hates The Shining, hates that movie. And he comes around on like other adaptations, but that's one where he has been like, nope, don't care for it. So how do you still honor the source material while also acknowledging and honoring that Kubrick's movie is considered a cinematic classic, and those images are so iconic.
mm.
So I am so impressed by the adaptation of Doctor Sleep. I think not only an incredible storyteller in Mike Flanagan in his own right could have done it, but also somebody who has an affinity and an understanding for King and for King's work. That was essential. I bring up the director's cut because I actually really like the book Doctor Sleep. I know some people think it's goofy, and that's fair. But I really like it. I think Abra Stone is the young woman who has The Shining. I think she is one of the most incredible new characters to come in book form. It's she's kind of like an X-Men. She's kind of like a superhero, except like, but she's this incredible, interesting, smart, and powerful young woman, and a young woman of color. And I think that is like amazing. Um, and when I saw the movie was 2.5 hours long. It's still long. And I was like, I need more. Where's the rest of my book? So then I watched the director's cut. And personally, I know it's only about 30 more extra minutes, but what that extra time does is allows those characters to breathe, allows the more emotional moments instead of the plot moments, and allows us to see the true knot in a way that makes them scarier, in my opinion. So I would tell anybody that if you have access, the director's cut is streaming on HBO Max. So if you have access to that, I would suggest watching that because I think it is superior to the theatrical cut.
I
Interesting.
agree. It's definitely tough just to adapt Stephen King in general because his novels are so dense. So doing
Yes.
it in the mini series form or something like that, the longer you get to spend on that story, the better. So that's why I prefer the director's cut as well. It's just hard to recommend something that's like 3 hours long. That's the only thing, even though it does kind of tie up any questions or really flesh out a lot more like within those. But I love Abra as well. I completely agree with you. I got to go to the premiere for that one and I interviewed a lot of the cast and crew and they were just so ecstatic about the film. I feel like the fact that Mike Flanagan always brings back a ton of casts within his
Yes.
filmography and in his TV shows, I think that just shows that he's a very kind director. He's very aware of the cast. He makes everybody like welcomed and feel at home because that's one of the things everybody was praising Mike Flanagan when I interviewed them. That was their first thing was that Mike's set was so comfortable. Even though it's a horror film, they were just like completely fine. The set was warm. And yeah, I geeked out with Mike Flanagan on the red carpet for a little bit. He like stayed longer to talk about Stephen King and just how much that means to him. So to have a director do this adaptation and love the source material so much, The Shining and Doctor Sleep, that's something that's very essential when you're adapting this type of work. And yeah, so the director's cut 100%, I agree with you, is far superior, but the film itself I still feel like does a really great job. It is nice to get those loose ends though tied.
It's so difficult. I mean, maybe it's my opinion, but difficult in a different way to talk about this movie with you guys, considering you have both read Doctor Sleep's the book. So that's why you guys are probably way more familiar with the themes than I am. But possibly what I got from it, especially towards the end of the movie, is the idea. Obviously, the adventure of seeking immortality, but also the sin of immortality, and
Mm.
how I mean, obviously the Jacob Tremblay scene is what everyone always goes back to, but the idea of kind of taking this older ancient generation, imposing their power, imposing their will, literally taking the life out of the new generation and the new people and the new
Topical. Hmm?
kids. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we talked about Enola Holmes. I don't know if you saw that Netflix film.
Oh, I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, but there's some similar themes in there as well. But it really is interesting about how they're, using their ultimate power to impose their will and become immortal and take the youth away from the young people. And they really make it a point to make it real young people, to make you really feel the emotion and hurt behind that, and not just like 30-year-olds playing teenagers, but like actual like kids that look like kids. And that makes it even more painful for an audience member to see that. But that is a really interesting point, considering we have a grown-up Danny in the film that's kind of leading us on this adventure. But one of my favorite parts of the film is, remind me the main character's name. I forget her name.
Abra?
Abra?
Abra. The way she views herself, I thought was one of the coolest parts of the movie. How she views herself as like a literal like Super Saiyan anime action figure. I thought that was the coolest thing, because in reality, when you're a kid, I mean, that's how I would view myself, with like Super Saiyan Goku hair, and kicking ass. And that's how she views herself when she's in her ultimate state. Uh, that amplification of how I am this larger than life figure is a really powerful statement within itself. And I thought that was a really cool part of the film as well. Any final thoughts on Doctor Sleeps? Sabrina, go ahead.
Just going off of what you said about Abra, yeah, she's like powerful, she's brilliant, she's strong, she's vulnerable when she has to be, so it's realistic as like what a child would feel if they're put into this situation. And yeah, going off of again Mike Flanagan, the themes he hits, because obviously we with Danny, he's definitely suffering with that trauma and that
Mm.
grief, and that's something that I think Mike Flanagan captured perfectly. And obviously, because it's something that he's worked with a lot within his filmography, but that was one of the things that I really hit home, and it added that layer of depth that we didn't get with Jack.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to briefly mention a movie that I literally just saw last night. And I've never seen this film, and my roommate is probably real mad at me right now. But he told me about it years ago. My roommate's he's a real horror guy. Like, he's got me into. He made me see It Follows, and he highly recommended. I mean, Descent. He made me see Descent. I saw that
Love
with
that.
him. But he highly recommended. He's like, dude, you got to see Hush. And I was like, sure.
Hmm.
Never seen Hush until last night. I finally saw Hush. I knew the premise of the film, but I really see a lot of what I like about Mike Flanagan, specifically from The Haunting of Hill House, which is what I saw recently as well. is the direction of his film, considering this movie is literally a buck 20, and it's a tiny budget, one location, and it's a crazy, creepy killer guy who wants to get inside a house and kill you. The premise is very simple, yet the execution of it through the camera work, the filmmaking, all that aspect that goes inside a horror movie that makes directors household names, considering, again, I'll go back to Get Out because that's one of my favorite movies of the decade. That's what made Jordan Peele such a big name as well. And it was a tiny budget, and it was kind of a one location kind of film. That's what I like so much about this movie, Hush. But it also is that classic, and I don't know if you guys are going to agree with me or not, what would you do scenario of like, that's one of the best parts of horror films, right? Is like the what would I do if I were in this scenario kind of thing. If it was a crazy killer trying to kill me, or if it was a shark trying to eat me, what are my scenarios to try and get out? But I don't know if you guys have seen this film or if you have any thoughts on it. I'll go to you, Clark.
Yeah, I watched Hush when it came around when it came out.
Okay.
I didn't love it the way everyone else loved it.
Okay.
However, all the things that you just mentioned, you're absolutely I agree with. Like the filmmaking, the acting, the woman who is the lead in the movie.
Yes, I forget her name.
I want to say her name's Katie. What is it?
Kate Siegel.
Kate
Kate,
Siegel.
that's right. Yes, Kate Siegel. And she is also Mike Flanagan's wife.
That's right.
But I love that, this was something they did together. I love that this was a showcase for her because when we get to Haunting of Hill House, she blew me away. I thought she was, I mean, yeah. So I really appreciate Hush and I appreciate what it is. It just, of his body of work, it probably isn't in my top 5.
That's fair.
I enjoy this film a lot, but I agree. I actually really like it just for the fact that it does have that atmospheric tension because it is that cat and mouse type of thing, and where it's building so deeply throughout the entire film, and that's something that I really enjoy about that one. It's, yeah, great performances. That's basically the main thing that I got out of it, but I do like that cat and mouse type of take on a slasher that we don't get to see any of the like slashing. We just have this like smart woman who's doing her best to get out of this situation and to go down fighting. And I love to see that on screen.
That's exactly it. And obviously, I said it at the very beginning of the film. Maybe, I mean, I'm talking out loud because I'm allowed to, since no one else is around me. That's what I do when I watch films and I'm alone. And the whole time I was like, no, 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 no. Like, you're not going to chase me around for a night or two. If you're going to kill me now, bro. Like, one-on-one, let's go. That's the Mexican in me who was like, I'm going to get a knife, you going to get a knife. Let's see who comes out.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, that's literally what I said. And that's what she said at the very end of the movie. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. But yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. And it definitely has that kind of premise of, like, what would you do kind of thing. Any other films that you guys want to give a shout out to before we go to break and before we go to the Haunting of Hill House? Because he's got a lot.
So many. I know we talked about Gerald's Game a little bit, but
Okay, yeah.
I absolutely love that one because it's a similar thing when we talk about Hush, because this all takes place in basically one room, and you learn so much about the character through her own like internal monologues that are happening out loud because she's alone. And just that entire experience, she's so smart and so savvy with what she has to work with and deal with around her. And then having her emotional trauma of her past kind of bubble up to the surface throughout this time because she's alone and she's slowly dying of thirst, slowly dying of starvation because she's chained to the bed. And I just love the way he captured that. I love how he had her speaking to herself throughout the film. It's just because she had her husband and then she had herself kind of coaching her through it, and he was like the negative voice and then she was the positive voice, and that was the reason she was basically able to get through the entire situation was through her own motivation. And so I just love that one. I think it's heartfelt, heartbreaking, just super moving.
I will say that if you enjoy something like Haunting of Hill House, which is, I would say it's a sad story. It's got some scares, but ultimately it's very emotional and dark in that way. I think Before I Wake is much better than anyone gives it credit
Mm.
for. I just think that don't go in expecting a straight up horror movie. Go in expecting a drama with supernatural elements. And then the last thing I want to say is, before we go to break, on the Stephen King of it all, I cannot recommend, if you are looking for something spooky this season, and you are interested in the work of Stephen King, I cannot recommend the audiobook of it more. Yes, it is, y'all, it's long. Okay, it's long. However, Steven Weber, the great actor, is the narrator, and he is probably the best audiobook performance I've ever heard. It is, I think, the definitive way to consume that story. I just cannot recommend it enough. So if you're interested in something like that, the audiobook of it, read by Steven Weber, really, you're in for a treat.
That's great. Does he do the kid voices as well?
He does. He
Wow.
does. But he doesn't do them in like a, I feel like they're not insulting. Like that for me is always a thing with audiobooks. Whenever a narrator is a man and they read a female or more feminine character and they change their voice to, oh boy, I just don't even, I'm like, oh my God. And
Yeah.
Steven Weber's very good about that. And his Pennywise, okay, I don't want to ruin this for anybody, but I have to say it because there's going to be like one person who does this and they're going to tweet at me and be like, you're totally right. His Pennywise sounds like Daniel Plainview from There Will Be Blood. This is not
Oh,
intentional,
wow.
but I'm telling you, I was like halfway through the audiobook for the first time and I was like, sounds like Daniel Plainview. And now I just love it. Like it
Yeah.
makes me giggle every time. But yeah, Steven Weber is an incredible actor, but he's an incredible voice talent as well.
Now I just want to see Pennywise do the milkshake scene the whole
Right?
time. I just want to see like, I drink your milkshake, Billy. Um,
I
I
love.
think that'd be amazing. Real quick before we go to break, what are your thoughts on the? Because Sabrina and I have our own thoughts, and I'll I don't know if you can guess it on the It movies. I don't know if you have thoughts on those.
I have thoughts on them, yes. I love the first movie.
Okay.
Love the first movie. I think the first movie is truly an excellent adaptation of that part of the book.
Okay.
I really think it's very special too. I like that it's silly. But I like that it's scary and they mess those kids up. Like I'm all for it. The second one, for me, again, I don't know why this wasn't a trilogy. I don't know why you're trying to cut this 1,500 page book into two-hour features. That is insane to me. And I also think that with more time, you could have done so much in terms of, because I could have a whole
Sure.
we could talk for hours also about adaptations. I have
Yeah.
strong feelings about how to adapt things. And if you're using genre as a metaphor,
Mm.
especially for the adults, it's all right there. And it was just so fast. It was so, everything was glossed over. And we rarely saw the adult losers in the same room together,
Mm.
which was wild to me. So I was insanely disappointed
Mm.
the first time I saw chapter two. I did go back and rewatch it after some time had passed and after I knew how much I really didn't like it. And I liked it better. I liked it
Awesome.
better. What are you, where do you
I
guys stand?
adore both these films. Like
Good.
adore. It's one of my favorite. I think I tweeted this out one time. It might be my favorite like one-two
Nice.
punch.
Yeah.
Because obviously trilogies are always a thing. Um, but when it comes to like a film that's like a part one and a part two, whether it's 21 and 22 Jump Street, which is like my favorite.
Yes. Agreed.
That's my favorite part one and
They're
part two
great.
of all
Yes.
time. But following that, it would be It Chapter One and It Chapter Two. I loved It Chapter Two. I think I was the only one who came out of that theater who was like, "That was amazing, right, guys?" And everyone's like, "No, it was too long. It was 3 hours." And I was like, "Oh yeah, but I liked all
Well,
three of those hours." And Bill Hader was amazing. Uh,
that's a thing. Bill
yeah,
Hader Bill Hader was incredible. Honestly, a lot of the cast was. We just didn't get a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
Even though it's a 3-hour film.
Our film, but somehow we didn't get enough of the group dynamic, especially as adults.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know it's not perfect, but it's a guilty pleasure. I'm like right on that thing where I love it and I enjoy it, but I know it's not perfect and I know where it could have been like possibly improved upon. But for something that's as dense as that book is, kind of continuing on with that second film, you know, I think he did the best that he could with that one.
I love how pleasantly funny it is. I almost think it's a horror comedy. If I'm being honest, I can make an argument that it's a horror comedy. I almost kind of want to make that argument that chapter 2 is a horror comedy.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that argument, and I
Yeah,
think the humor is a big part of the book as well.
it
He's a
is. Yeah,
clown. Like
yeah.
like
It's
seriously, if
supposed
you
to be
want to
kind of
break down the
goofy. Yeah,
storytelling, exactly. I mean, like the jokes and the whether or not they land is one thing, but like that's part of it. And I
yeah.
do have to say, Bill Skarsgård, um,
Amazing.
outstanding. I
Yeah.
mean, he is every time I watch chapter one, especially,
Mhm.
I am I find something else that Bill Skarsgård did where I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And I love him in chapter two as well. Again, I just don't feel like we get any real time with him.
Mm.
Um, there was talk for a while of like a Pennywise kind of thing where we get to spend time with Pennywise because the book is so great. It goes through generations. It goes through
Yeah.
hundreds of years of this creature. And I want more of that. I want to see, I actually do want to spend 2 hours with Pennywise because
I
the
think they're
different
still doing that.
iterations, I hope that they do.
I
Who
think they are.
knows?
Yeah. The whole Pennywise spin-off might be a thing as well. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we can talk hours about. We did RB3 and I actually did. We did a podcast episode about chapter 1 and how groundbreaking that film was. Obviously, the biggest horror movie of all time, like
Yep,
literally,
yep.
and how it hit so many demographics when it comes to like if I'm from my hood, like Latinos, how many Latinos went
Hmm.
out and saw that movie? How many memes it created, how legendary and iconic the performance of Bill Skarsgård was, how everyone was doing the imitation. Like there was legendary moments in that film that I think it really will stand the test of time as like a classic horror film.
It was
Um,
a lot of people went as Pennywise, as the kids, as
yeah,
Georgie.
Yeah.
they were
Halloween
saying
has
the lines.
strayed into like pop culture already. This one, so that's awesome.
Yeah, it was incredible. I really do love those films. But either way, guys, we're gonna go to break right now. After the break, we're gonna get into the Haunting of Hill House. So make sure you guys stick around.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh. With the 450 divide you in half. You getting at me equals a club half. You do the math, take you out the equation.
Check out this snippet from The Meaning of J.A. Bayona, where I give my infamous Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom take. Enjoy!
So Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom.
Yeah, coming off of The Stinkers, I was like, all right, I'm going into this. I'm going to have zero. My expectations is literally rock bottom to the floor. I expect this to suck. I'm going to hate myself for watching this. I literally just watched this movie before coming here to record this podcast. Walked out of the theater, came right here. Here's my initial thoughts, everybody. I fucking love this movie, Ace.
What?
I fucking love
No,
this movie.
no.
This might actually be,
Why?
if not my favorite, my second favorite
Why?
Jurassic Park movie. I'm not gonna
No.
lie. Everything.
You're the one who rigged this. You lost my 8 followers, bro. You're like, yo, unfollow Ace. Unfollow Ace, bro. Just do it. He's wrong, bro. Dang, man. I genuinely want to hear why.
Check out our new website on geeksofcolor.co/first-cut to check out our reviews, our videos, and articles that pertain to everything First Cut related. Check it out.
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? We are back talking about Mike Flanagan and the Haunting of Hill House, and finally, we are getting to the Haunting of Hill House, a series that a lot of people recommended to me for quite a while. I finally got around to seeing it about 3.5, 4 weeks ago, and we have thoughts. But first of all, I want to get to you guys as far as what introduced you to this series and kind of what were your thoughts going through it when it came to the stories of this family. And I'll start with you, Sabrina.
Yeah, I'm notoriously an awful TV watcher, so I never stick to a TV show at all. So this wasn't even in the front of my mind. I kept seeing it on the Netflix homepage. One of my friends kept recommending it to me, saying, "You have to watch this. I know you're gonna love it because I know your taste in film." So I finally did, and I binge watched it all in one night. I stayed up the entire night to finish this show because you become completely engrossed in this story. Like, the family and everything that happens around them, this cloud of doom that seems to be around them because of their upbringing and their childhood home. It's it's something that I find so interesting because Mike Flanagan obviously uses a non-linear structure to tell this story, and I think it adds so much depth and layers to each character right off the bat that you wouldn't necessarily get if we had like flashback scenes later on, short ones. We really get to dive into their childhood and why they are the way that they are and the way that the episodes are structured. I couldn't get enough. I couldn't just watch 3 episodes that night. I had to completely finish the series. So this one was absolutely mind-blowing to me. I think it's one of my favorite series like that's come out in the past few years. This is the one that I recommend to anyone if they can stand horror, if they like horror. But I also really love the aspect that at the end of the day, it has a lot of horror elements and it is a horror, but it's also a family drama.
Yeah, same question to you, Clark, as far as your introduction to the show and what were your thoughts as you were going through each episode?
So, I watched it the day it came out. It's funny. I have a weird, well, it's not weird. It's a funny story though. I was in Dallas, Texas when the show came out, getting ready to shoot Satanic Panic. So I had like a cameo in the movie. My scene, actually, fun fact, was the first scene shot of the entire movie. So day one, shot one, that was mine and Haley's scene. And the director Chelsea Stardust is one of my best friends. So this was not her first feature, but like this was like a bigger feature than she had just done. And so they shot in Dallas. Originally, my girlfriend, a girlfriend of mine from Austin was going to come, or I'm sorry, excuse me, from Galveston was going to come meet me, and we were going to have a girls' weekend. And then because I was like, Chelsea's going to be working, she's got to start shooting a movie on Monday. And then the girlfriend of mine, she had to cancel. And she's like, but keep the room. I'm gifting you the hotel room. Like, enjoy yourself, whatever. So I had gotten there several days early because I was planning on spending time with her. And it was thunderstorming and raining. Truly, no joke, broke flooding records for Dallas, Texas that weekend that we were there, the first day of shooting, like all of that. So I was kind of, Chelsea was off like get it prepping, right, for to go into production on Monday, and my girlfriend had canceled. And so I sat in a hotel room, a big cushy cozy cool hotel room, older too, and it was thundering and pouring rain all day, and I watched Haunting of Hill House all day. And it was really cool. It was a really cool experience. I'll never forget it. And also, one of the things that I like about Haunting of Hill House is that I would say that you can watch that show straight through and not feel like you missed a bunch of things. Now, there are layers. That is a show that you can rewatch because there are so many little things like baked into the background and all of that stuff. But I actually think it is appropriate if you want to watch it straight through. So yeah, so I was on board from the beginning, and really, I will say the first couple of episodes, spending each episode on a different character was hard for me at first. I didn't love that at first, but then, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, Andres, the bent neck lady episode comes, and then we're off to the races. That's how I felt. Oh, you're muted.
My bad.
There
Yes,
you
that
are.
is the same episode that really did the same to me. It really is interesting, and I don't know if you guys have seen this. Speaking of Stephen King adaptations, did you guys see The Outsider? I feel like I'm the only one who
Yes.
saw that show.
No, I watched it.
That
Yeah.
show's incredible, by the way. I think that's one of the best Stephen King adaptations, if I'm being honest. I thought it was really good. But one of the best parts of that show and maybe it's just because I've seen enough horror movies, and maybe it's just because I grew up the way I did. But if someone tells you there's something supernatural going on, then there's something supernatural going on. And
Take their word for it.
It frustrated me so much. But what I liked about The Outsider is that Ben Mendelsohn's character is the logical, purist kind of guy. He's the cop. He's the one who's like, I gotta see facts. I gotta see statistics. And I love the line that his wife has in that show where she says the most logical conclusion is that it's a supernatural thing. So your own logic is that it's supernatural. And I guess that was my frustration with the first few episodes of The Haunting of Hill House with, I think it's Steven? It might be Steven? Who's the brother, the older brother, who thinks that it's all fake?
Yeah, Steven.
Steven? Where I'm like, bro, you're literally seeing your dead sister. Like, how much more evidence do you need? But again, the idea of this is all a vision, this is all some sort of mental illness that he feels
exactly
like is part of his family makes a lot more sense towards episode 6, I feel, than it does specifically in episode 1 or 2. But that was like my main thing, where I was like, you're seeing actual ghosts that are touching you. I don't know how much more evidence you need. But again, that's just me being a person who's like, believes in the supernatural. But go ahead, Sabrina.
That's something that I enjoy a lot, because with each character you get such a deep understanding of how this affected them specifically. Yeah. And with him, it's like that repression.
That's true.
Yes.
One that actually saw his mom too. Like, he's one of the only ones that really saw what was happening with his mother. Mm-hmm. And so that repression, that believing that this isn't the case, even going so far as to think your family has mental illness to get a vasectomy out of college, that's that particular character. He didn't want to continue this thing, even though he knows that's not the case, that it really was something sinister in the house. And it's just how he deals with it.
But I would actually argue that it's not something sinister in the house. Like, that's what's so great about this material, is that, again, with the metaphor, right? Like, the circumstances that we are in making things worse. And that is what is so interesting to me. The idea that, yes, if we're going to just specifically talk about Carla Gugino's character, the mother's character, she had mental illness. Yes, we acknowledge that. However, the house was obviously making it worse. Her circumstance, for whatever reason, and if you apply it to your own life, whatever reason could be a lot of different things. But for whatever reason, it was making it worse. And so to me, I actually don't necessarily blame the house. And I think that that's what's so interesting about showing us the lives outside of the house and since the house, is like, sure, the house didn't help, but it was always there. But the same thing with alcohol, with drugs, with, any type of, you can look at this and say, okay, well, like, something was there and then the substance makes it worse, or take it and apply it however you choose. But again, this is with gothic horror and storytelling, and, whether it's Shirley Jackson's original novel, or whether it's Turn of the Screw, which is the new season, Bly Manor, you can read into the circumstances however you please.
Yeah, there definitely was a shift, I believe, in episode 8 or 9, where you start to realize, like, maybe evil isn't necessarily the word you would use to describe what's going on inside the house. At first, I was like, the first thing I do is burn that damn house down. You just burn it down. That's what I would do. So as soon as, what's his name? I forget. See, I'm so bad at names. The littlest kid, the one with the glasses.
Luke.
When Luke was like, I'm going to burn it down, I'm like, yes, do it. That's what I would do. But it's one of those things where you start to realize, like, the people inside there, specifically, I really like that old lady when she starts talking to the old lady, who looks terrifying because she's like this creepy old lady. But when she starts talking to the old lady ghost, who's just like, yeah, I've been here. That lady's crazy. That's just a thing. I'm going to go back to my room. Like, she's just chilling. I just think it's the funniest thing that she's like, it's not my fault that I'm a creepy looking old lady. I'm just a ghost who lives here and who minds my business. But that one is kind of a troublemaker, is what she says. But yeah, that's definitely a part of what Mike Flanagan was trying to say about lost souls and lost spirits inside this house. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Well, no, I do. I believe that the house is like alive almost. Like it has this energy and this presence because if they had originally burnt it down after the first incident, obviously a lot of the things that happened in the future wouldn't have happened. But also, it's so tough to talk about because it did like bad, but it also did a lot of good. It's kind of where the family started to fall apart, and it was that catalyst. But then also at the end, obviously, it's kind of what brought them together once they were able to reunite, like emotionally, and kind of revisit this place that they grew up in for a bit of time. Kind of, deal with their own things that haunted them, everything, whether it was the addiction or what happened before. And kind of, yeah, go forward with that because obviously we see at the end that they do move past this thing. But yeah, with the red room, because they describe it as a stomach, like the stomach of the house, and it's obviously attracting them all back to basically feed off of them. It's breaking them down emotionally, physically together as it separates them in their mental states. So that's why I believe it's like alive and it's a character in itself. And yeah, I think sinister, but it's also how they kind of all deal with it at the end because it does bring them all together. So it's definitely an interesting conversation.
I want to jump to episode 5 because I feel like, obviously, in my opinion, the most tragic character of all is Nell, especially when you find out. Episode 5 is the one that really made me feel like, oh, God, this sucks. Because it really is that idea of something that's been explored in a lot of supernatural medium, specifically TV shows. Obviously, the idea of time, the idea of how hell could be time, and maybe hell is being stuck in a different dimension for a certain period of time. That sounds like hell to me. Buffy does it. Supernatural does it. These are shows that have talked about the idea of how time it might be different, a different relation to it, and how it might be a loop. So when we find out that Nell is haunting herself, which I think is a terrifying notion, and how she's actually is it the crooked neck lady, the bent neck lady?
The bent neck lady.
The bent neck lady. To me, that's horrifying. It's the outside body experience of you seeing a younger version of yourself, and how she screams in horror because she's seen a younger version of herself, and she realizes like that was her first scare when she was a little girl. It's terrifying. It really is terrifying on so many different levels because it's that idea of traumatic torture you're giving yourself. And it's an actual like crooked neck lady and the actual horror aspect of it all. It really is so many layers to that amount of trauma that you're inducing on an audience like me that really felt some type of way about Nell.
It's interesting because like and this is something that I haven't necessarily been shy about, especially on social media, but I deal with depression. I take medication for depression. I speak with a therapist, to deal with anxiety and depression. And I think if you're a person if we're going to take Nell as an example, in a lot of ways, if you're working on your own mental health, however that manifests, whether it is depression or drug addiction or alcohol or whatever it is, you often feel haunted by yourself, meaning like the idea that you don't just fit, at least in my experience, I am not a doctor, but it's like, you don't just fix your depression, and you can think, okay, I'm on the upswing. Hey, I don't feel bad today. Look at that. I beat it. I'm done. Don't have to worry about that anymore. And then all of a sudden it comes right back. And you, at least for me, like before I started taking medication and like really, getting a handle on my depression, I would feel haunted by myself in ways that felt reminiscent of the character of Nell. And so I think once again, it's like you just said, she's scary. It's scary to see a lady with her neck broken, like standing over your bed. Like, yeah, no, thank you. That is terrible. And that's where the horror, like the traditional horror storytelling comes from. But when it comes to the emotional resonance and what a ghost, once again, it's kind of like your demons, the ghosts of your past, the ghosts of your family, the ghosts and being haunted, like it's such a perfect allegory.
Yeah, what'd you think of episode 5 and the idea of Nell, Sabrina?
I think Nell is definitely the emotional core of the entire series. Even though we obviously lose her very tragically, she is the one that is the driving force throughout the first few episodes, and then honestly throughout the rest of the series, and obviously what she does on the last episode with her family. And it's really sad to look at that story, especially going off of everything Clarke said. Like, yes, like that, she's haunting herself. She's the reason why she ended up that way, and it scared her as a child. It's so tragic, and it's so sad and so moving, but the way that she took what happened to her and then decided, well, because we know throughout the show that she is a genuine, kind-hearted person, but the fact that she took what happened to her that was so tragic and still didn't wish it upon anybody else, continue to help her family get through this. And she's like, I love you, I know you love me, even though the past few years, the past few decades have been hard. And so Nell is my favorite character. Nell and Luke together, I think they're dynamic, but Nell is easily the standout of the entire show to me. Oh, muted again.
And obviously, them as children are very endearing as well.
Oh my God.
What's great
They
about
are
the
cutest little babies.
adorable.
I just have to say, they were adorable.
Yeah, the idea of taking the adult cast and having them be a reflection of the children's cast is it's a genius in casting, even above anything else, but it's also the acting of it all, and the idea of how they reflect each other is really, really well done and really smart. I loved it. And how at first, I can't lie, I might be the only one, was genuinely confused with the sisters because they look so alike, Theo and the older sister and the mom. I was like, are they all the same person? Is she playing 3 different characters?
They really do look like a family. It's wild, especially the women, like specifically the women.
Yeah.
Even going off of that, when we have that long take that we do, I think in episode 7.
Episode 6.
Episode 6. When we have that long take and they have the family in present day and then it reflects to them, it's so believable. And when you have in situations like that where it's back to back, it really has to work, and it did.
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump to, too, is the idea of episode 6. Obviously, oneers in horror have been something that has been going on for quite a little bit, but I feel like it's been even more amplified nowadays. Obviously, James Wan is someone who loves to do a couple oneers, but the idea of the horror of a camera moving, which is actually something that's really an art form, and it's really something special in filmmaking. But I love the slow push-in. It's one of my favorite aspects of horror. But also the pan, because you pan and you're just like, you're going to see something. You're ready for it. You're like, something's going to show up because it's slowly panning, and I know it's going to scare me. But the idea of taking that and making that an entire episode, what were your first thoughts when you saw episode 6? Because to me, I was like, all right, this is it. This is the best episode. It's all downhill from here because it's so well done. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Clarke.
Yeah. I remember thinking, it's so... I feel like another hallmark of the Mike Flanagan brand is a certain style of writing. So, it's dialogue heavy. It's and it feels theatrical in a lot of ways. So I feel like when you were watching that episode, it felt like you were watching a play. And I think that that's great. When it comes to the technical aspects of filmmaking, especially when you have to move things, whether it's effects, whether it's sound, whether it's an actor in and out, especially when you're doing long oneers like that. I mean, you know what it does for me, and this might just be because I work in the business, we work on the business, so maybe we relate to this a little more, but I automatically get nervous because I'm just thinking of all the working parts that have nobody better have left a light in the shot. Like, what if somebody trips? What if somebody's mic doesn't work? What if and I just get anxiety looking at it. So that episode is impressive for so many reasons, but I also think it's such a showcase for the actors, and because the actors have to be ready. They have to be on it. There's no cut, let's take it again in that type of atmosphere. So it's incredibly impressive.
Yeah, Sabrina, same to you. What were your thoughts on episode 6 when you first saw it?
Yeah, I'm basically echoing everything Clarke said. That was my first. I enjoyed it the first time I watched it, and then the second time I went back to rewatch it, and I'm like, I can't imagine what it's like to film something like that. Everybody needs to be in the right place at the right time. I think it's about 17 minutes long. Is it that long? That is absolutely nuts to me, to go back and forth. It really, I think, is so stunning, and I think it lends itself beautifully to the story and what it's trying to capture in that moment. And yeah, I salute to Mike Flanagan for like doing that, because it was beautiful on screen.
It's difficult because it has the writing elements, which I feel like is also as difficult as pulling off a Wonder is. The writing of a Wonder is really difficult to do because the writing has to be so realistic. The dialogue has to make sense, as far as like, why are you dragging this out, right? Where it's like they're just doing this to make sure the camera stays on this shot. That's why they keep talking about the same thing or something like that. But they make sure it makes sense when it comes to every single conversation, the blocking of it all. It really is a nerd's dream to watch this kind of thing, because the set production is really well done too. The house, the way it goes from the funeral home to the house, is one of the best parts of that as well. Yeah, go ahead.
I rewatched Hill House. I don't even maybe earlier this year. I've watched it a couple of times, but every time I watch that show, it blows my mind that it received 0 Emmy nominations. None. Not for production design, not for direction, not for acting, not for, I mean, like, the Emmys are crowded, I get it, but for production design, like, the intricacy of every scene and the significance of everything in the frame for that show it's remarkable. And it is just so frustrating to me as, like, not only a genre fan, but an advocate for this type of storytelling. I actually recommend Haunting of Hill House to people who are not horror fans. This is something that I feel safe saying, yes, it has ghosts. There are a few scares. However, this is a drama. This is a family melodrama. And I think anybody could relate and enjoy it. So the fact that it was completely overlooked as a production, it blows my mind every time.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, the Emmys are extremely crowded. I actually give credit to the Emmys for at least putting some genre stuff in there. I kind of like that they put some mainstream stuff in there, unlike the Oscars, who are kind of afraid of it. Shout out to Stranger Things. Every time this year when they had the nominations for best like drama series, and they had the Stranger Things, The Mandalorian, Succession, Ozark, all shows that I watched, I'm just like, oh, these shows are all great. But I like that they have that. But yes, production design is incredible. The acting in it was incredible. It really was a really well done show. But I like what you said, Clarke, because you're right. I didn't get it until the last episode. Well, I think I did. I think by episode 8, I was like, okay, I think I know what this is. But by the last episode, I was like, wait a minute. Is this a Disney film? It's like, it's all about family, guys. I love my dad. My mom, it's all good. Come here. I was like, this feels like a Disney film right now.
That
it's kind
is
of incredible.
That is a Mike Flanagan thing as well.
Yeah.
Most of his material tends to tie up with a little bow.
It does.
And sometimes it works. Sometimes I would argue it does not.
I kind of, call me a sappy dude, but I'm into it.
I love it for Hill House.
Yeah, but I'm not. I like really dark horror endings where it's just pitch black. I do. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't work, to be honest. I feel like it's kind of a cop-out nowadays where a lot of filmmakers are like, I'll make it pitch black dark and no one lives and it's the end. Yeah. But sometimes I feel like it's a little too overused. But I kind of am a little fan of, like, it's a horror movie with a lot of heart. That's what we love about it. And that's what I love about Haunting of Hill House, where it's a horror series with a ton of heart. Like, it's almost all heart, considering it's all about family and believing in one another and getting together and facing your demons and all this kind of Disney movies kind of stuff, where we like to see a family come together to fight a bigger issue than themselves. Yeah, Sabrina, go ahead.
I think also we get so attached to these characters
Mm.
and we really deeply understand them, even if we don't like them. Like Shelley is somebody that obviously she's very high strung.
I like
Everything has to
Shelley.
be her way. You liked her?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe well, it's all subjective.
Is
That's,
Shelley the oldest girl?
yeah,
Yeah, I like
Shirley.
Shelley.
Yeah.
Shirley.
really.
I
Okay.
I stand a Shirley too,
I
but
like Shirley.
also I might be a little bit of a Shirley.
I was gonna say I might be the most high strung, so.
So
That's what I love about it is because even if there's times like I'm attached to her, even though she reminds me of somebody I know in my life, and so that's why I can see the faults, and it really just stands true and clear. But at the end of the day, we're so attached to them with each having like their own episodes, really focusing on their backstories and how it affected them to this day, that I feel like we had to end it on a more positive note. I feel like it would be so dark and dreary if it was completely negative, because we did obviously lose the father. And I feel like that was enough. It was almost like one last little sacrifice of the family to rid the rest of them free of this. And so I like that ending because Oculus ends on a like different note, and I don't like that ending the most, but I understand it, but I don't love it.
I would love to just add that I think that so we talked a lot about using genre as a metaphor for depression, addiction, grief, trauma, etc. So I think there is a responsibility to the filmmaker to think about, all right, what kind of message are you putting out there? If you've just told a story using grief and trauma and addiction and depression as a metaphor and the core of this tale, are you trying to say that there is not a way out? Like, you need to be really careful about that. Now, I will say, Mike Flanagan and his work, he reminds me a lot of Joss Whedon in some ways, where he's not afraid to kill people you like. And so I don't ever feel like he's soft, if that makes sense. But I do think that there is a responsibility, and I think that he is smart enough to be aware of that responsibility. The only place that the happy ending with the bow doesn't work for me is Gerald's Game. Like, the courtroom, the epilogue courtroom thing with the letter and all of that, lose it. I would have chopped that thing off and set it on fire. And I love Mike Flanagan and I admire Mike Flanagan, but that was the one time that I was just like, nah, we can see the Moonlight Man. We can figure out what's going on. I don't need 10 minutes to explain to me the last 90 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, we're good. We got it. But other than that, that's my only, like, the one time.
Yeah, there's still a lot of dark elements inside the show. Obviously, the horror elements of it all is really well done. I love the lighting in this show, and I know a lot of people, especially nowadays, are very anti, like, it's too dark, turn off the brightness. But I'm a sucker for it. I'm a sucker for, like, really dark lighting and really well done lighting. One of my favorite movies of the year, I almost forget the name of it. Is it called In the Heat of the Night? In the Vast of Night?
Best of Night.
Vast of Night. I think the way they do lighting is really well done. It's so minimal, but I love the idea of minimal lighting and making that scary. How just it's so like difficult to see that just that itself is terrifying enough because your imagination is imagining the worst. So that is a really cool aspect of the show. But dark also in the idea of the mother character. I feel like the mother is definitely a tragic figure for a lot of this show because she is so like saint-like throughout a lot of it, but at the end she does something really sadistic, and I'm just like, I don't know if there's any going back from that because as soon as I found out you were doing that, I was like, you lost me, man. Like, that's pretty dark what she did at the very end, but it kind of builds that element of like what torture is being done to the children based off the choices of the parents, which I thought was a really well done thing they do throughout the show. But I don't think it holds back when it comes to punches and hitting you with some hard blows, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That they're able to do both, which is why I think it works better as a show than it would as a movie, especially throughout 10 episodes.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I love that it is dark because obviously, as we know, because of social media after this came out. There's all those ghosts that are hidden. There's so many, we can't even count them. They're really everywhere. I saw somebody do a countdown, and there were so many that I would have just thought were splotches, and then you zoom in really, really close, and it's a ghost face. So it really is putting us into the shoes of the characters, where it's this dark, dreary kind of vastness, and they're afraid of it. We're afraid of it as we're watching it, because we can't quite understand it the same way that they can't quite understand and know everything that's happening around them. But yeah, the mother, it is really sad and tragic for that story, and it's obviously she suffers from mental illness, but to me it was all obviously the elements of the house and the ghosts in the house kind of put ideas in her mind and really manipulate her to do a certain thing, because they want to eat the family, since they're like the stomach. It's like they want to consume the family, and they put it into her mind that she sees her children in the future and sees that they struggle, and puts it into her mind that in order to keep them safe and young forever and full of life, it's actually death. Like, she's saying, like, you can come alive now, but she's actually talking about their death. And yeah, it's definitely really heartbreaking, especially what happens to Abigail and the death.
Yes. Yeah, and obviously the end kind of got me teary-eyed when it comes to her character and when it comes to what happens to that family. I can't lie, I got teary-eyed. It worked. Thanks, Mike Flanagan. It worked on me. I was like, am I really getting suckered into shedding a tear for this show? But yeah,
He likes to make you cry.
Yeah.
Mike Flanagan likes to make you cry.
Yeah, and it definitely worked. I definitely felt some feelings. But yeah, it really is pulling you in and showing you different elements of the show. Do you guys have any favorite moments? I definitely want to give us a chance to shout out any favorite scares or moments throughout the show. Go ahead.
I have one that I have to shout out, and that is the best jump scare, I think, in the whole thing. But like we were talking about earlier, do you know which one I'm talking about?
I think so.
Yeah, in the car.
Yes.
Yeah. But for anybody who hasn't seen the show, I don't want to like get into what exactly happens. I'll just say that. But I think that it really, not only is it effective because it's a true jump scare, which is great, but also it is the catalyst that breaks open the hearts of both Shirley and Theo. They have to finally bust their issue wide open. And so the scene, and this is, Andres, you mentioned James Wan earlier. James is like my favorite new current, like my favorite. I love James, and I'm a big fan of his work. But what he does with jump scares is very similar. They always lead to something. It's never just a jump scare for jump scare's sake. It is always the start of like, a sequence. And in this case, it's not an action sequence like it might be. I say James Wan, his horror movies have action sequences, frankly, which is amazing and cool. But it's the start. This one in the Haunting of Hill House is the start of an incredible emotional story sequence, and so that stands out to me in a big way.
Absolutely. Sabrina, any shout outs you want to give?
That was definitely my scare. That was the most terrified I was, but then also like everything Clarke said, it's completely earned and it leads to so much more. My favorite scene that I enjoyed watching, which is funny because I love horror, I'm a huge horror person, but the sequence between Nell and her husband, I love that atmospheric tension he built was alleviated for a moment. And for a moment, we're like, oh, this is so nice. And obviously that also ended very tragically. But while that was happening, and we kind of get a lot of the siblings at the wedding, just their personalities. And I loved that they made Theo's character a lesbian woman. I loved all of that, and they added that into the story very beautifully, and kind of how it affected her and her relationship with others, and how she can't open up and she kind of closes herself off. And her entire arc in general, that she really uses the money Stephen made so that she can help other children. She studied like child psychology. I loved everything about Theo's character.
Yeah, to me, the entire highlight is episode 6 for me. Obviously, the scares are amazing, but the scares in episode 6 are really interesting because there's obviously a lot of slow building to it. But the knocking on the door, that happens at the funeral home is terrifying for so many
So
different
good.
levels. And it's just knocking, which is kind of funny, but it's just really hard knocking to the point where I would be yelling like, "Yeah, come in." At this point, you might as well. I don't know why I'm a big yeller. I'm a big communicator where it's like if some ghost is trying to say something, I'm like, say it, just say it. That's what I would be yelling the whole time. Yeah, that to me that and then the idea of having shared ghostly experiences and denying it, it always made me so angry. Where they're like, "Did you see that? Yeah, I saw that, but ghosts aren't real, bro. I mean, come on now. It's not like we grew up in a haunted house." I was like, "What are you saying? You literally grew up in a haunted house and you still don't believe." I thought that was frustrating, but yeah, go ahead, Sabrina.
I like how they look at Steven like he exploited the family and made up all these lies, and which
Yeah.
like he kind of obviously fabricated some stuff for the novel, but it's interesting how much they repress everything because it is so difficult for them to deal with, and how they don't truly know the events of what happened. I enjoy that aspect a lot.
Yeah, what was there was one scare. I believe it is um it's the one where is it Shirley is doing the autopsy on her sister, not the autopsy, but prepping her. That scare really got me. Also, just anything having to do with Nell being stuck in some sort of state. I believe there's one scene where she like cuts open her
Right.
um, her mouth open. She cuts it open to speak. I love how that actor kind of uses her facial expressions to communicate terror and horror. I think I told Sabrina or RB3 the way she used her mouth, just being like it was just incredible the way she was just communicating so much pain and fear, and trying to communicate with her siblings. I thought that was really well done. So that's probably my favorite, and the knocking part was I thought really well done as well. And the top guy, the top hat man,
I
the whole
love the
time,
man with the hat. Yeah.
yeah, I'd be like, "Come on, man, just talk to me." But yeah, obviously this show has so many layers. I want to give you guys the final thoughts on the Haunting of Hill House, and I'll start with you, Sabrina.
Yeah, this one got me so shook throughout the entire like I was just surprised by how much heart it had, how moving it was, and genuinely how terrifying because I'm a huge fan of psychological horror and that trauma and grief and everything. So it really affects me emotionally and physically, which is what I like to do if I watch a horror movie. I want to be affected. That's what I go into it expecting. So I was so surprised when I watched it for the first time and got through it all in one night because that never happens to me with TV shows. And I've rewatched it a few times since, and I do really think that it's just this beautiful, tragic story that ultimately, like we said, ends up a little bit more positive and a lot brighter than it starts. But just the house itself, my final thoughts is just like the house as a character, how it affects everybody that's lived in it through generations, how people wall themselves into somewhere until they starve to death, or different things like that. I just find so fascinating, and it goes again with what I said about Mike Flanagan and his buildup of like mythology. Even though this is an adaptation, he adds so much to it, and he really just makes it his own. So that's my wrap up of like Hill House and Flanagan in general. Is that I just enjoy a lot of his work because he puts his heart into everything, and it's very apparent that he cares so much about all the works that he does. So
Yeah, Clark, any final words?
Yeah, I would just say that if you are going to give the show a try, this spooky holiday season, um, I think you can trust this show. I think a lot of audiences, especially ones who aren't, well, even a lot of audiences, when they sit down to watch something that is a genre story, a horror story, they're on guard, they're on edge because they're so used to cheap scares and that whole deal. And what I would say is you can trust the show. Yes, it's going to scare you at some points, of course, but that's part of it. And your emotion is tied to the fear. The overall emotion, it's part of the storytelling, it's intentional, it's not cheap. And so if you can open yourself up to that, and again, experience a lot more emotions than just horror related fear, then I think you will really you'll allow, if you can let the show kind of engulf you, it's a really cool emotional experience.
Yeah, it really impressed me watching this show and really experiencing the family member stories each episode and really kind of diving into what this show was trying to communicate. It still terrified the crap out of me, and it still made me very angry at Sabrina for recommending it to me because I was like, "How you told me I'd be fine, Sabrina," and I was not fine the whole time. I
I
was
lied. I
definitely
to watch it.
yeah, yeah. You're like, you'll be fine, and I was not fine. I'm a baby when it comes to these kind of movies, and it did that. It scared me, but at the same time, the final episode just, for some people, I've seen that it's a very split kind of episode when it comes to like, did you like it, did you not? It hit me. I'm a sucker for it. I have my Disney fandom inside me, rewatching all my Disney princess movies, and I was like, it got me. I was like, this movie really did it when it comes to, I'm sorry, this series really did it when it comes to hitting the emotional strings inside my heart. So there we go. I'm a sappy dude, and Mike Flanagan knew it when he made this show. Uh,
Yay.
but also, this is a little mini shout out to Bly Manor because it comes out today, because today is the release of this episode. So by today, you will have seen Bly Manor, or it's now available. And you guys have seen it. Any preview you can give us? A little tease, a little mini tease, Sabrina?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think Mike Flanagan follows this up with the second season, this anthology series, with a really strong one. It definitely takes a few episodes for to get into the story and really dive in, but once we do, I think just the same way I think of Hill House, where it has a beautiful conclusion. So I would highly recommend checking it out. It's definitely not as scary, so if you're worried about being a little bit terrified of Hill House, this one's a little bit less scary, so.
That's a thumbs up on my end. Clark, any little tease you want to give?
Yeah, I would actually describe this, I would describe The Haunting of Bly Manor as a gothic romance. It's interesting for anybody who remembers when Guillermo del Toro's movie Crimson Peak came out. It was really, I love Crimson Peak. I love it
Crimson
too.
Peak.
I love it too. But it was released in October. It was marketed as a horror film, and I remember poor Guillermo, just every time he opened his mouth, he was like, "This is a gothic romance. This is a gothic romance. This is not a horror movie. This is a gothic romance."
Yeah.
And so I would say, if you've seen Crimson Peak, think more in that space. Ghosts as benign messengers, things like that. It's I think they're easily companions. I also agree with Sabrina 100%. The first half of this series of Bly Manor didn't quite gel for me. That said, the second half of Bly Manor, and you have to have the first in order to have the payoff. The second half of Bly Manor, I mean, it wrecked me by the end. I was like, I was crying. and not to mention, I couldn't stop thinking about that show once I had finished. So once I left it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And that, I think, is a good sign. But it is different than Hill House. They're cousins, of course, but I don't think that one is not the other. So you could easily love Hill House and be like, I hated Bly Manor. You could love Bly Manor and be like, Hill House is not for me. So give it a go. There's really good stuff in it. Great performances, great actors. So I think it's absolutely worthwhile.
That's great. Yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm definitely going to watch it. And I'm so happy that you guys are saying it's less scary, because the first one definitely scared me. But yeah, I know what you're saying about gothic horror as far as the vibe of it all is much more on that gothic horror element. At least for Crimson Peak, it was. I love the production design in that movie. I thought it was incredible. So
I love Crimson Peak. I'm with you. I'm with you.
That the entire production design just made me feel like that's worth the price of admission, on my opinion.
Stunning.
Yeah.
It's stunning.
It's beautiful. Clarke, thank you so much for joining us and throughout this episode. We really
Thank you both
appreciate
so
it.
much for having me. RB3, we missed you. I missed you. But thank you so much for having me. I could like I've said 100 times already, I could do this with you both for hours. I could keep going. So this is super, super fun. And what a lovely way to spend some time in the spooky season.
Yes, it is. Clarke, where can everyone find you?
Yes, so I did want to tell your audience, if you
Yeah.
enjoyed this talk that we just had, so I am a part of the Walking Dead universe over on Twitch, but something cool that is starting next week is I am going to have my own horror show on that channel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so it's going to be me talking to chat. So come join us in the chat, and I'll have some plans. We'll have discussions, but I'm so excited that they're giving me this opportunity to just have a little horror show. So that's going to actually be every Wednesday, and I can tell you the time because we haven't launched it yet. So I actually just am like, wait, what time is all this happening? So it should be going live at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So Wednesdays, I should say it the other way. Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. It's Clarke's Untitled Horror Show because we don't have a name for it yet. Maybe chat will help us. So that's going to be at twitch.tv/TWD Universe. Come, or you can just follow me on Twitter or Instagram and I'll tell you all about it. But yeah, if you liked this and you want to join us, please do. It's going to be really fun.
That's amazing. I did not know that, and obviously that sounds like a lot of fun. I will definitely tune into that. You said
Please
Wednesdays,
do.
right?
Wednesdays, that's
Yeah,
right.
that's great.
Wednesdays.
I would love to do that. Yeah,
Yay! Thank you guys again for having me. This was a blast.
absolutely. Absolutely. Sabrina, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, that's awesome, Clarke. I can't wait to tune into that. But you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at SabrinaXMonica, and then also on Twitter at SabrinaOnFilm.
Alrighty, guys, I'm at Squad Leader Ace, and obviously you can follow us at First Cut TMO and subscribe here at First Cut if you haven't done so already. Make sure you tune in to Sabak the Block, the new Star Wars show that I have with Emma Fife, coming to you next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's really interactive. We're going to have a ton of games. So make sure you guys are ready to join us in the chat because we're going to be reading a lot of you guys' chat. So make sure you guys tune in there to Sabak the Block next week, Tuesday at 6 p.m. And for the Meaning of Podcast, I am Andres.
Sabrina?
And that was Clarke
I'm
Wolfe.
Clarke.
And we are peacing out. Peace out, guys.